Hello, everybody. Okay, so today I want to start a new series. I want to do a series on the great speech of Protagoras in Plato's Dialogue of Protagoras, which is one of my favorite bits of classical literature and Greek literature especially. There's a famous mythos or myth. There's also a logos, an argument. So we'll get into that later. Today I just wanted to sort of start out the series by reading through in Greek and translating the question that Socrates asks Protagoras, which launches him into this great speech, to which the great speech is a response. So the background is Plato's Protagoras, when it begins, there's a young guy called Hippocrates, and he wakes Socrates up. He's really excited. He's heard there's this famous sophist Protagoras in town, and he wants to go and see him and ask questions and discuss with him, and he wants Socrates to be there as well. So, and Socrates is kind of less keen, and he keeps saying to Hippocrates, well, it's important to know what this guy is selling. What does he think he's doing? And Hippocrates can't really answer it. It's hard to answer questions against when Socrates asks you a question because he's never really satisfied. But anyway, he doesn't do a very good job of answering. Hippocrates doesn't do a very good job of answering the question of what it is he's actually looking for from Protagoras. So they go to where Protagoras is. He's at this gathering or this party, and soon enough, Socrates and Protagoras come head to head. And so Socrates again asks this question directly to Protagoras: what is it that you're actually selling? What is it that you're actually teaching? And Protagoras says something a bit vague, and Socrates tries to help him, supposedly. And he says, okay, well, is what you're teaching politike techne? So the political skill is the most sort of basic translation. Politike techne, the kind of skill that goes into making a polis. So you could think about it as a kind of cooperative skill, cooperative technique. And Protagoras says, this is exactly what I'm teaching. I'm trying to teach politike techne. And then Socrates says, well, is that really a thing that you can teach? And I actually think it's not a thing you can teach. And the reason that he gives for not believing it's a thing that you can teach, well, really, he sort of calls on the authority of the Athenians. He sort of says the Athenians clearly think that politike arete, or politike techne, political skill, is not a thing that you can teach. And in order to support that point, he kind of asked this big question about the operation of the assembly. And it's actually a really interesting question because, I mean, on the surface, this is all about political skill and whether you can teach it. But actually, as you'll see, I think this question immediately opens up all of these other questions about really why the Athenians have a democracy and why the democracy functions as it does, why they let just anybody speak on matters of politics, matters facing the polis, when they actually don't let anyone speak when it comes to other matters. All right, and you'll hear more of the details when we actually read it. So we might as well read the actual Greek, probably because it's better, probably because this is what this series is for. All right, so we're going to go back to find the place in my text. So we're going to go to 319. What is it? I guess it starts 319b, 319b3 to use the traditional Stephanus page numbering. All right, I'm going to read the whole passage in Greek first. Okay, I'm going to go through it. This is Socrates speaking. So I'll try and do my Socrates voice. Ego gar Athenaios, hosper kai hoi aloi Helenes, femi sophus enai, horoun hotan sulengomen eis ten ecclesian, peden men pedi oikodomias ti dee praxai ten polin, tus oikodomus metapempomenus sum bulus, pedi ton okodomimaton, otan de pedi naupagias, tus naupagus, kait ala panta hutos, hossa heguntai mathetate, kai didacta enai. And etis allos epikaire autois sumbuluen honekenoi me oiontai demiurgon enai, can panu kalos kai plusios kai ton genaion uden ti malon apodekontai, ala kategalosi kai thorubusin, heos an autos aposte, epikairon legen kata thorubethes, hoi toxotai auton afel kusosen, exarontai, keloonton ton plutaneon. Pedimen un hon oiontai en techne enai, huto dia platontai. Pedan de ti periton tes poleos diokeseos de bulusastai, sumbulue autois anistamenos perituton, homoios mentecton, homoios de calceus scutotomos, emporos naucleros, plusios penes, genaios agenes, kai tutois udes tuto epiplete hospertois ploteron, hoti udamoten maton, udeontos didaskalu, udenos auto, epeta sumbuluen epicede. Delon gad hoti uk heguntai didacton enai. So yeah, so that apparently shows that the Athenians think, all that shows the Athenians think that political skill, political techne, is not teachable. But as I say, it actually raises lots of other interesting issues. Okay, so let's go back through this question. So, all right, so Socrates says, Ego gar Athenaios hosper kai hoi aloi Hellenes femi sophus enai. Okay, that's a pretty easy start, I think. So the main structure of the sentence is sort of ego, femi, sophus enai Hellenes, right? So I say that not Hellenes, Athenaios. So I say that the Athenians are wise, right? So and then you have some other bits to add in. Hosper kai hoi aloi Hellenes. So I think, or I say literally, I say that the Athenians are wise or clever, really, just like the other Greeks. So the Athenians have a reputation for intelligence among the Greeks, and you find this cropping up in some authors. I mean, Pericles boasts that they're the school of Greece, but also you may remember Herodotus when he tells the story of how Pisistratus gets in power for the third time, and he has this handsome girl dressed up as Athena, and Herodotus kind of says the Athenians are meant to be smart, but apparently they believe this ruse. Anyway, so here we have another reference to that kind of thing. So Socrates agrees the Athenians, Athenians are smart. And he says, Horoun hotan sulengomen esten ecclesian. So he's like, they're smart, but I noticed something weird, this sort of jarring. Epedan men pediokodomias tide plaxet in Poland. So let's start with the first bit. So, but I see that, horoun, and so I see, hotan sulengomen esten ecclesian. So whenever we gather together in the assembly, ecclesia, word for the assembly in Athens, epedan tide plaxite in polis polin pedi oikodomias. Whenever it's necessary for the polis to do something about oikodomias, so literally it's sort of house building, but let's say architecture. Whenever it's necessary for the polis, the political community, the city-state to do something to do with architecture, tous oikodomus metapomenus symbolos. So it's the architects, the oikodomus, the house builders who are summoned or called as counselors. Metapomenus, participle symbulus, counselors, or a symbulos is a counselor, someone who, not like a counselor in the really modern sense, but someone who gives advice, an advisor, I guess. It's those who are sent for as advisors, periton oikodomematon, about house building or about architecture. Hotan, and then he kind of just assume, and the rest of it you just have to assume this sort of metapempomenos symbulus bit, called as advisors. And so whenever it's about naupagias, hotan peri naupagias, then you call on tous naupagus. Whenever it's about shipbuilding, you call on the shipbuilders. Kaitala, single word, but it's really two related together. Ta'ala, right? So, and all the other things, hutos, and all the other things, tala, panta, hutos, all the other things in the same way. Thus, hosa heguntai mathetate, kai didacta enai. Literally something like as many as they think are learnable and teachable. So all of which they think are, all of those they think are learnable and teachable, or all of those things which they think can be learned and taught. So Socrates is kind of observing this thing, this strange kind of fact that, well, we haven't got to the really strange thing yet, but he's observing this habit the Athenians have of like when they have to focus on shipbuilding, they talk about shipbuilders, and And then he's adding in his own view that the reason that they do that, the reason that they ask for expert shipbuilders is that they're assuming, they're thinking that actually these things can be taught, people can be trained in them. They're a field of expertise, in other words. So that's why they're doing it. So that's kind of his little bit added in there. Not just observation, it's also kind of a view. Ean ditis alos epikaire autois sumbuluein hon ekenoi me oionte demiurgon enai. So, but if, and this is the strange. Oh well, this is actually still the observation. Sorry, I haven't gotten to the strange bit yet. So, if somebody else etis alos epikaire, if he tries to sumbuluein, if he tries to advise them, out. Hon ekenoi me oionte demiurgon enai, whom they do not think is a craftsman. Can panu kalos even if he is very handsome, beautiful, kalos, kai plusios, and wealthy, kai ton genaion, literally, and of nobles, so and from a noble family. Ude timalon apodechontai. They do not receive him at all. They do not accept him at all. They do not listen to him at all. But instead, Allah katagelosi kai tholubusi. So they katagelosi. They laugh him. They laugh him down. Kata, right? They jeer at him and they thorubusi. They make a hubbub. That's thorubos is this important word for a kind of hubbub in the assembly or in the courts. The people kind of make a big noise, heckling, I guess. So that's what happens if someone tries to speak on a subject that people think you're not a craftsman in that. In other words, you're not skilled in that subject when it comes to these things or ordinary things like building and shipbuilding. They'll jeer and they'll heckle. Heos an autos aposte, hypokainon leging kata thoru bethes. So until either he himself, the speaker aposte, he kind of leaves off, or he sort of ceases or goes away of his own accord. Hypokainon leging, the one who was trying to speak, kata thoru bethes, meaning having been hubbubbed, having been sort of heckled down, passive participle, or so the other option is, or hoitoxotai auton efel kusosen, the archers drag him away, ex arontai, or they really kind of means the same thing. They efel kusosen, I guess, is a bit stronger. They drag him away or they take him away. Kilowonton ton prutaneon. Genitive absolute, I guess. So the prutaneon or kelewonton ing there. The prytanes are shouting or they're ordering, I guess. They're ordering him to be dragged away. So the prytanes are these this group which this is talking about the 5th century. So they actually consist of the group of 50 men that each tribe sends to the central council, and for 1 month of the Athenian administrative year, they're going to serve as the presidents of the assembly. So you can translate it something like the chairman of the assembly, the presidents of the assembly. So that's what happens. If somebody is trying to speak on shipbuilding and everyone knows he's not a shipbuilder, he's never had any apprenticeship in shipbuilding, they'll literally shout him down. And apparently, according to this, I don't know how seriously to take this historically, but according to this, the presidents of the assembly will actually get the archers to drag him away. The archers, who are they? Why are they archers? These are Scythian archers. You find references to them in Aristophanes as well. And they're basically the police force of Athens. Athens doesn't really have a police force, but they have these Scythian archers who are public slaves, the mozioi, and they can deal with things like this, crowd control. They don't really do much else. But anyway, so this is a reference to them here, to toxotoi, the archers. All right, so then he sums up this first bit. This is observation, Socrates' observation. Peri menun hon oiontoi en tekneenai huto dia platontai. So about those things which they think are en tekne, huto dia platontai, they act in this way. They do thus. Yeah, so in techne, about those things which they think are kind of amenable to expertise or a field of expertise, something like that, or a kind of craft. Got to find some paraphrastic way of saying it in English, but something like that. So as for those things which they think are a skill or a craft or a field of expertise, a specialized field of expertise, this is what they do. Now we're finally getting to the thing that Socrates finds funny, finds strange. Epedande, but when ti peritontes poleos diorkeseos de bulusastai, when it's necessary to talk about something to do with the diorkesis, the administration of the state, the administration of the polis. When it's important, when it's necessary to deliberate about something to do with the administration, the management of the polis, the city-state. Thumbulue autois anistamenos perituton homoios, and then you have a list of different things. So somebody standing up, anistamenos, sumbulue, he advises. So someone, I guess in English we could use the future. Like he'll stand up, someone will stand up and advise them about these things, about the administration of the state. Equally, the tekton, equally homoios de chalcheos, so equally the carpenter, tekton. These are all kind of lowly crafts. You'll soon notice. The chalcheos, the bronze worker. The skutotomos, the leather cutter, the leather worker, the cobbler, really, the shoemaker. The emperos, the merchant. The naukleros, the sailor, the ship's captain. The plusios, the penes, the rich or the poor. The genaios or the agenes, the noble or the ignoble, the less noble. And nobody epiplatai tuta. Nobody kind of claps back at this. Nobody protests this, hosper tois protron, like those before, the other people he was mentioning who got shouted down because they weren't skilled in that craft, right? Which is strange because the point is these guys are kind of lowly craftsmen. They don't know anything about how to administer the polis, but they're allowed to stand up and speak when it comes to a debate about the polis. So Socrates says nobody epiplates, nobody barracks them, hoti uda mothen mathon, or let's say him, that he has he's never learned, he's never studied with anybody, or he's never learned at any point. Ude ontos didaskalu udenos auto. Nor do they say that he never had a teacher. Literally, there never was a teacher to him. It's a pretty familiar idiom in Greek and Latin. The equus est mihi. You have the word and the verb to be plus the dative. So nobody says that that this person has never had a teacher. Epeta sumbuluin epikere, when he tries to advise or consult. And then you get the final conclusion, or this is kind of like the QED. This is what Socrates was arguing. For it is clear that they do not think that this is teachable. So all that is really, on the surface, the first thing it's meant to do is to show you that the Athenians don't think that political virtue is teachable. But as I say, it opens up all these other interesting questions because basically this is sort of an attack on the democracy. I think, or it's a very skeptical question about the democracy. It's like, isn't it crazy, Socrates is saying, that when it comes to certain expert fields like shipbuilding, if you don't know your stuff, you get heckled, you get shut down, and everybody goes with that. The presidents of the assembly go with that. The toxotai, the archers go with that. If you stand up, you talk about something to do with the administration of the polis. He doesn't sort of make this point, but on the face of it, that sounds more serious. Then anybody can stand up. And so he suggests here that this might be because the Athenians don't think that it's teachable. I suspect there's a more deep-seated skepticism going on here. And the fact that this is a question that sort of puts into question some of the key features of the Athenian democracy, one of which is that you have to be a freeborn citizen male to take part in the assembly, but there's no property requirement in the classical period. So it doesn't matter if you're poor or humble. It doesn't matter if you're a shoemaker. You can still speak. And that's important to the Athenian Democrats. And so Socrates is calling that into question. And this is why, when Protagoras answers in the form of his great speech, yes, he's going to be, um, answering this question about political virtue. Is political virtue teachable? He pays attention to that. But he's also going to, I think, be kind of trying to vindicate, trying to defend, and sort of justify the Athenians' practice in the assembly. And that's why, and it's one of the reasons, besides the sort of content of the great speech itself, it's one of the reasons why people have taken this, scholars have taken this great speech to be one of our only really positive defenses of democracy, theoretical defenses of democracy, bits of democratic theory from the ancient Greek world, which is kind of why it's cool. Maybe I should have said that at the beginning. So I think it's kind of cool partly because, the Athenians had a democracy, other city-states probably had democracy, almost certainly had democracies too. But there's a strange thing that paradoxically we don't have that much democratic political theory. We have a lot of anti-democratic political theory. And the theory about that is that, Democrats kind of took their world for granted. They took what they were doing for granted. They didn't feel a lot of motivation. They didn't feel a lot of pressure to justify it. Plus, a lot of the Democrats in Athens were poorer men. They didn't have the leisure time to write long works of political philosophy. The people who did have, the guys usually who did have time to write long works of political philosophy, they tended to be wealthier, they tended to be a little bit more skeptical. Maybe they were from aristocratic backgrounds, like, for example, Plato. Uh, and so it's very interesting that, so nested within this Platonic work, which I think ultimately, it's probably, reasonably fair to Protagoras, but ultimately it's on Socrates' side. This is written from the point of view of a school, the kind of Socrates-Plato school. But it also preserves this very interesting bit of democratic theory. And, maybe this isn't really what Protagoras said. It almost certainly isn't exactly what Protagoras said. And maybe Plato's taken some liberties, but I think it's likely that Protagoras made something like this argument in reality. And the reason I say that is just because people who were around in the 4th century BC when this was published, they knew about Protagoras. Probably the more educated ones knew about Protagoras' arguments. They would have had access to works by Protagoras probably. And so Plato couldn't have gotten away with completely kind of misrepresenting Protagoras' arguments. All right, so that's enough for an introduction. We've had the first question, so that's it. This is the challenge to Protagoras. Can you explain that? Well, A, can you say why you think political skill is even teachable? And B, can you justify this? Why is it that the Athenians behave in this extraordinary manner of actually allowing humble shoe makers and bronze workers to speak about the diarchesis tes poleos, the administration of the state, in their assembly?